I am IDPwD, the CEO of Billion Strong, the global identity organization by and for people with disabilities. And this is Meet the Board of Billion Strong. Today, I have with me someone who is absolutely amazing. She's a disability and inclusion specialist. She's also a social impact strategist. And recently, she won the title of Miss Wheelchair North Carolina. And she's also a day trader. You talk about a resume. Please welcome our board member, Strong, the global identity, Ali Ingersoll. Ali, welcome to Meet the Board.
Thank you so much, Lamondre. It is a pleasure to be here and such a delight, and I'm so excited to be on the board of Billion Strong.
Well, we are delighted to have you. You have such a varied background and the insights and perspectives that you bring to this board of directors. I tell you what, it is absolutely appreciated and so good for the community of people with disabilities globally. So thank you for being a part of that. And so I want to move into some questions that I think will really help people get to know who you are. All right?
Yes.
All right, here we go. So how did you become involved in the disability community?
I think the obvious answer first is I broke my neck in a shallow water diving accident when I was 27, 11 years ago, in my home in the Bahamas, leaving me a C6 quadriplegic. And I really didn't get involved in the disability community for the first 5 to 6 years after my injury. As I was in the hospital, I moved across the world to China for spinal surgeries. I had more medical complications than one could probably fit on a page. And so I was really involved in my own life and trying to survive. It was survival mode for many years. And my disability advocacy career started out in the health insurance industry, actually. Okay. I was denied medically necessary equipment. I needed to not only survive in life, but to thrive. And after repeated denials, I kept looking at the letters of medical necessity my doctors wrote, which were 3 sentences long, and it was appalling to me. So through a lot of battles and hard work and research, I have a very research-oriented mind, I taught myself how to write letters of medical necessity backed up by peer-reviewed research papers and journal articles. And from there, my work started to garner national attention, and I have made it a mission to partner with organizations around the country in the United States to teach and empower self-advocacy. And at first, it was just within health insurance. And it became my global mission to not only help individuals with disabilities get the equipment they need or medication or services they need when working with their medical professionals, but my present mission is getting adaptive exercise equipment covered as a medically necessary benefit, not just as a non-covered benefit. Right. Because as we know, those with many disabilities who are non-weight-bearing individuals, whatever, be in a wheelchair, the reduction of comorbidities and cardiometabolic diseases and secondary complications is so important. So I'm working on that nationally. And from there, health insurance, I started to partner with a lot of different national nonprofits on a lot of different issues on diversity and inclusion, disability and inclusion in the employment world, and started writing articles for national magazines. But I would say the crux of my life's work thus far is 2 philosophies I live by: paying it forward and human kindness. I do not think there's enough of that in the world. And so I really focus on normalizing disability. Right. For me personally, through the lens of dark humor, so really having people in society understand what many of us with disabilities go through and normalizing it and making them understand that disability doesn't discriminate.
Right.
Any one of us can join this club for any reason. It doesn't matter your race, your color, your gender. It's a universally shared experience by 15% of the world's population.
And when we talk about it being 15% of the world's population, we recognize that is not a small number. That is not a small amount. And so
over 1 billion
we
people.
are 1 billion plus people. Because even that 1.3 figure that's out there, that was put out there by the World Health Organization, we recognize that is probably super conservative. We recognize that is
because a lot of people don't identify with a disability, but they have one because they were born with it or whatever the cause may be.
Absolutely, but people don't identify as people with disabilities. And how do you view identity, being that Billion Strong is an identity organization, what is your view on identity?
As it relates to disability or just identity? It's a complicated question. There's multiple parts. So for me, my identity, part of my identity is disability. Part of my identity is a fierce, ferocious, independent, determined woman who will stop at nothing to get it done. And I forget about my disability sometimes, although it's made me stronger. So I think each experience you have collectively adds to your identity as you proceed in life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with that. How do you think the world views people with disabilities? And the reason that I'm asking that question is because I believe that identity is a two-way street. I believe that identity is, number one, how you see yourself, but it's also how the world sees you. It's how you show up in the world. So how do you think the world views people with disabilities?
I think it's slowly changing, but unfortunately, I have to say I believe the world sees disability as a weakness. Because historically, disability, people shy away from looking at people with disabilities or acknowledging them because people were terrified from an employment standpoint or societal standpoint that there's something wrong with us. And historically, I lived in China for quite a while with my disability, and you did not see anybody in a wheelchair out in public. They were kept at home because there was something wrong with them. And I think that's really unfortunate. So changing that global narrative, and that narrative is different for every single country. We're much more accepting in first world countries in Europe and the United States and Australia as compared to in the Middle East or in Asia, for example.
And that's one of the reasons that Billion Strong was created, to help change the narrative around the world, or to build the narrative about people with disabilities, even to ourselves. Because as I said, this identity is a two-way street. How you see yourself and how the world sees you. And so that's why we created Billion Strong. Now, Allie, why did you choose to get involved with Billion Strong?
I started to see the impacts of my work in the United States, but I have a very unique background. I call myself a global nomad. I have a German mother and an English father, and I grew up in school in Europe, and I lived in China on my own for many years, in Australia and New Zealand, and traveled globally. And so I really wanted to take my work globally. And I have a very unique understanding of many different cultures and the cultural sensitivities that come along with that. So I wanted my impact to be greater, because this isn't about me. This is about empowering and educating those with and without disabilities who don't feel that they have. And so a lot of people say, what can one person do? One person can ignite another person to spark a change, and that will create a movement, which will create a revolution in the way people think.
It is the aggregate of all of our efforts. So that one little spark becomes a raging inferno, and that's the idea behind it. That is the idea behind it. So what is it that you would like to bring to Billion Strong? What would you like to contribute to the organization as a whole?
I would like to contribute normalizing all types of disabilities to the able-bodied population. And I really want the able-bodied population to realize that we are, I have to say, compared to many of the able-bodied population, many of us with disabilities, we are stronger, we're more creative, we have to think on our feet. We live these lives that at a moment's notice, we have to plan A through F, because life is great until it's just not. And a lot of that has to do with medical challenges or caregiving challenges. And so we are very creative problem solvers, and we work hard. And when we believe in something, we won't stop. Many of us won't stop until we accomplish that goal, because there are certain days where you're quite literally just trying to survive your day. And I know many people in the disability population who would like to get more involved, like I am, but they're on Medicare in the United States or Medicaid, and they're simply trying to have an aide come in to help them get out of their bed, and they don't have the time or the resources. And I am fortunate enough to work for myself, and while I'm not on government support, unfortunately, every dollar I have goes to care and medical, but I have the time and the setup to be able to give back. So I really want to inspire others with disabilities around the globe that they can make an impact. And that's through education, awareness, advocacy, and taking action, even if it's baby steps. And that means different things for different people. Some people take a big role. You're the CEO of Billion Strong or being on the board. And some, it's just organizing a community picnic event for individuals in their town with disabilities to make them feel not so alone.
Right. One of the things that stood out to me as you were answering that question was this concept of economic empowerment. Because as the poverty rates, particularly among the community of people with disabilities globally, is extremely high. And even if you are earning an income, even if you do have certain means, typically all of that is consumed in care. All of that is consumed in just managing your life. So $100,000, and I'm talking U.S. right now, $100,000 in the U.S. for people who don't have the needs and need the supports, it doesn't go that far. You can live very well on $100,000 as someone without a disability, but as someone with a disability, you could still be living in an impoverished situation. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about that you're looking for your next meal, but I'm talking about your ability to do other things than handle your care. So it's a real issue.
Enjoy your life, your quality of life.
Exactly.
It's your quality of life. I agree completely. 70% of my income goes to health insurance and caregiving costs and out-of-pocket medical supplies. If you take it down to the bare bones, at the end of the day, somebody making $100,000, for example, in real time, if they were able-bodied, it may be $30,000.
Exactly. And so when you start to think about that, we recognize at Billion Strong that without economic empowerment, there is no real empowerment. Without economic empowerment, you cannot progress in the way that you would like to or that you would need to. So that's a big part of a big part of our platform, our global platform at that.
Well, and that involves training from an educational standpoint, those with disabilities and vocational skills that they can do from home, because many of us have to work from home with significant disability. Right. And that's a very challenging proposition, because then Medicare and Medicaid have to lift their limits in the United States of how much income you can make and not get penalized to have your benefits taken away.
Right. And that is all a part of it. That's all of a part of what we are looking at addressing. And this is why this is so important. And this is also why having someone like you on the board who has that experience and who has that expertise can help guide that process. So this is a fantastic situation for us and a fantastic alignment for us. Now, you mentioned before some ideas and principles by which you lead your life, but I want to ask, are there any sayings or quotables or ideas that really resonate with you, that really speak to the core of who Allie is?
There's a quote I grew up with from my father. He's a very smart man. Grew up in the publishing world, and he always said to me, "Allie, luck is the residue of design." And I said, at that time, I didn't really understand what that means. When people say, "Oh, you're very lucky," "Oh, that was luck that happened," "Oh, no," that is a culmination of making sure you have your hand in many pots at the same time and constantly finding opportunities. So when one falls off, another three present themselves, but you constantly are working on creating those own opportunities for yourself. So when you quote unquote get lucky, it's not luck at all. It's the work that you've put into it. And you have to be okay with rejection. No is usually a starting negotiation point in my life.
Right.
And everything I do. And I don't, whether it's fundraising for a board or working with an elected official or getting no from an insurance company, when they say, that's fine, I'll find a different angle in which to approach the problem with. It's all about strategic thinking.
Design. There's so much wisdom in that. There is so much depth.
Yeah. My dad is a very smart guy.
I was going to say your dad sounds like a brilliant man. That is fantastic.
He's my mentor. When I broke my neck, when I was working in politics for the Rockefeller family in my 20s. and I majored in entrepreneurship, and I opened up a Florida chapter of a civic engagement organization, getting underserved communities, specifically young people in community colleges, active in the political process. And I got jaded a little bit in my 20s by politicians. So I moved into day trading, and a year into my self-study course, and when I broke my neck in the ICU, my dad said to me, listen, kid, you broke your body, not your brain, get to work. So in the ICU, he cut me off morphine, and he brought the computer in front of me, and he said, I'll be your hands and arms until you figure out how to use them better. And yep, sure enough, he got me right to work. But I'm fortunate enough. So a big challenge in the disability community is a support system. Right. So if you don't have a great caregiver or something happens and your family, I have an incredible family, and I would not be here without them. And I have to say this over and over. People always compliment me on, oh, you've accomplished this. I said, yes, but I had a support system. Right. If I did not have that support system, as so many do not, I would not be here today. So I always credit those who helped around me help.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that is such an important thing for me too, because my family, my mother and my sister, they are the reason that I am who I am today, because they nurtured, they pushed, they challenged, but they were also protectors. They were also guides through all of that. And so all of those things were necessary in order for me to be able to stand up and protect myself and others, to be able to stand up and speak for myself and speak for others who did not have the voice, and to demonstrate what courage looks like, to demonstrate what success looks like, to demonstrate what failure looks like, and to demonstrate what fear looks like. Because all of those things are a part of what makes us who we are. And the truth about this movement is about being able to exist in a world exactly as you are, exactly at who you are, without being devalued, without being judged as insignificant or less than or broken or weak, and being able to contribute, being able to create,
right,
being able to really have what it is to be human.
It's true. And a lot of people in the able-bodied population, they don't mean any harm, but this is where education and advocacy comes in. People come up to me all the time, and I may be a horrible human being, and they say to me, oh, you're such an inspiration.
Right.
Oh, I hope you feel better later today. I said, well, I feel great.
Yeah.
I know they mean nothing by it, but they're just not aware because they may not have somebody in their life who has a disability. And even when I was a teenager, the disability, it wasn't even a word in my vocabulary, right, because back in the 90s, I didn't really see a lot of people with disabilities.
Right, right. And I think...
And it brought you...
Go ahead.
No, you asked me one other quote I live by, and here's another one, and I love this, by Winston Churchill. The definition of success is moving from failure to failure without lack of enthusiasm. And I fail every day.
Absolutely.
I just keep going and smiling and find another way. The inventor of Pro 409 took him 409 times to find the right formula.
Right. Now that and that is so true. And I think that is also a part of what we're doing at Billion Strong is demonstrating the full range of the human experience. Yeah, I may be an inspirational person. And here's the thing. I believe that inspiration is an inside job. I can't tell you what inspires you. Mm-hmm. I can't dictate what should inspire you. Like, for example, I'm a music lover. I'm a musician. And sometimes it'll be a plane flying overhead, and I'll hear the sound of the engine. I'll hear the sound of the wind whipping past it, and it will inspire a melody in my head. Now, here's the thing. No one told that plane that it should be my inspiration. No one said, plane, you got to inspire Lamondre to do that. That was something that I picked up on. So inspiration is an inside job. But now I will say, when people are pedestalized for simply eating a hot dog or showing up at a baseball game, really that's based in a concept of ableism. That's based in the concept of, oh, look at little Mondre. He's eating a hot dog. You hip hooray. That's so inspirational. Yeah. If that really inspires you, cool. I'm glad you were inspired by that. But don't bring that to me. Be inspired because I'm dope.
Yeah.
Be inspired because I'm doing something in excellence. Be inspired because you see the value that's being contributed. And hopefully it inspires you to contribute value as well.
Well, that's the whole mission of Billion Strong. It's empowering not just those with disabilities and educating those without disabilities. We have to get both sides of the aisle involved in the conversation. It just can't be about people with disabilities for disabilities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ellie, you mentioned changing the narrative, and I will tell you, you are the story that you're creating with the masterpiece that you're painting through your experiences and through your contributions. That is changing the narrative on a global scale. And so I want to thank you for being a part of the Billion Strong board. I want to thank you for what you have done. And I'm so excited about your future, and I'm excited about our future as an organization together as we move forward.
I am as
to
well.
do just that, change the narrative, the global narrative of people with disabilities. So thank you for being.
Well, and the board of Billion Strong is so diverse and is so many different perspectives and people from all over the globe. The collaboration is going to be incredible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not have said it better myself, and I'm really excited about it. So thank you very much. And thank you for the contributions that you have made and that you will make. So thank you.
The key is that I will make. Yes, I'm excited to move forward. Thank you so much. And thank you for leading the charge.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you want to know more about Billion Strong, go to our website, billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. Learn about us. Join the movement because we need you. Consider volunteering in some capacity with Billion Strong and make a donation so we can continue the good work that we're doing right now. And as always, this has been Meet the Board, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you. I am Lumandre Pugh, the CEO of Billion Strong, the global identity organization by and for people with disabilities. And today I have an incredible guest for Meet the Board. She is a social entrepreneur. She's an advocate for persons with disabilities, and she is the founder and CEO of the Valuable 500. Please welcome Caroline Casey. So, yeah, so Caroline, I'm so thrilled that you've agreed, first of all, to serve on the board of directors for Billion Strong, just because of your background and your passion and your commitment to the global community of people with disabilities. I often say this to you. I often say that you are the rock star and also quite a fashion icon, if I must say so, as well. So I so appreciate you being a part of this.
Serious. Now, laundry, what are you talking about? By the way, if anybody could see me, you should see I'm wearing like a lemon yellow sweater, as you guys would say, because I'm dialing in from Ireland. It's gone to -2 degrees, which is probably nothing for you guys. But
No, that's serious.
It's really cold. And I got these kind of crazy earrings that I'm very proud of. I think they're a little bit of plastic. But you're the rock star. And I think if there's anything that I would call myself at the moment, I just feel like a troublemaker or a hustler. I have lived experience myself. I have a condition called ocular albinism, and I'm registered legally blind. So it's exciting, the laundry. I've done an awful lot of calls today, and we've been talking about what identity is, that we're now starting to talk about disability. And I oh my gosh, because I've just turned 50 a month ago, and I know that is not something I felt when I was in my 20s. Actually, it's just changing, and you can feel it.
Oh, it absolutely is.
That's
It absolutely is. It's a different conversation.
Yeah, the energy behind it now. Yeah, and I don't know, it just feels like this is a moment that I don't think we're ever going to come back from work. I think we are moving forward in a way that is just loud and proud and exciting, and this idea of collective. We're like a collective, contagious group that can't be ignored. And it's, yeah, I'm very proud to have this identity. So
Yeah, this is, I believe that we are in a transformational time. And I don't just mean that for people with disabilities. I believe in the way that we show up in the world, just as human beings, how we show up in the world, being able to be authentic and being able to not necessarily look for a simulation, but simply look to be and be proud of that and have that being honored in every environment. So it really is a time of transformation for all of us, which actually leads me to the question of, how do you view identity?
So, so I have this thing that am really coming to terms with now in this stage in my life, that we're defined by no one characteristic or thing or experience or role or title or label. I'm very well known to say that labels are for jam jars, or what, maybe if that doesn't translate,
Right.
labels are for packages. So for me, identity now, or my disability is part of my identity in a way that I think is magnificent. And I think it's really powerful to be able to say that. For so long, when I was younger, I was fighting my disability. For a long time, I hid it because I didn't know how it could be part of the person that I was and wanted to be. And now it's just, yeah, I identify as that. And I identify as that as part of our global family, which is over 1 billion people strong, as you would say. But I had this incredible conversation today with the recording artist Lachi. And oh my gosh, you've got to meet her. She's just incredible. And she was just like, I identify as having a disability. I identify as being a woman. I identify as being a Black woman. And these are all fabulous parts of who I am. And I could feel myself just take a big deep breath in. I was like, yes, I totally can. And it just feels like that identity conversation, it feels powerful now. And in a way, for me, maybe quite magical, if that makes sense, because for so long, my unique story is that I hid my identity. I hid parts of my identity from the world. I was in the disability closet. And so for me, my identity is all of me, my good, my bad, my ugly, my light and my shade, the things I have to forgive myself for, the things that I should celebrate myself for, the journey that I'm on that will never end until I leave. So that's my identity. It's ever evolving, ever growing as I grow and learn to accept myself. And I think that's the big thing, isn't it? It's really about self-acceptance, because inclusion can only happen if we truly accept ourselves as unique individuals. And therefore we will accept
Absolutely.
others. And so that's, I guess, for me.
Yeah. And you know what? That's actually really beautiful. And I do believe that it's important for us to, identity is important because it allows us to, number one, understand who we are, but number two, be able to accept and understand who other people are as well, and that they don't necessarily have to match, that they don't necessarily have to agree, that they don't necessarily have to look like me, think like me, act like me, walk like me, talk like me, but they still have the right to exist and exist in full. And so that's what identity really says to me. You mentioned in your comments that for the longest, your disability, or you would not connect to it. And I know that in many instances, I did too. I couldn't hide my disability, but I tried to push myself so far away from it at one point until it was just, it was unrealistic, and I was denying a part of who I am with that. And a part of that was because of the stigmas that's associated with it and those internal fears that I had about how it would be perceived, accepted, and looked at. How do you think the world views people with disabilities?
I don't think I have an absolute answer for you because I've experienced so many different views. Have you? Every person I meet is unique in their own way, and therefore their view of us is unique. But I still think, honestly, we're only emerging out of old
Right.
stereotypes of inspiring or freakish, or I'm uncomfortable to offend, or I'm frightened. I would have said in the past that I felt that people who don't have lived experience, we seem very other. They say
Yeah.
those people, and you're like, but you will be part of our family at some point in your life because everybody will touch disability. Everybody will have an experience of disability, but I feel it's something that people want to hold away from themselves if they don't have a personal connection. And actually, I would have said in the past, I've seen people respond when I've spoken about my disability in the same way they responded when I spoke about my father's death, which is often with their head to the side, not as if it was tragic, but as if they were like, they just didn't know what to do or say. And these are people who didn't have a personal connection. And that's the
Yeah.
sense of otherness, isn't it? And you're like, gosh. And then on the other side, we have depicted disability as
Right.
superhero status that were unbelievably
Right.
extraordinary to be working. And then where it's just, it is a part of us and it's a part of who we are. It's a part of our lived life. And I now have learned to accept it's a part of something that makes me, I don't know, kind of beautiful in a way. I feel like I've finally come to the point that I rock the
Right.
beautiful difference and disabilities.
You absolutely do.
But I think we're
No, no.
confused. I think we're confused, Lamondre. I think we're learning, aren't we? I think we're evolving, we're learning. I think with the younger generation out there, oh my God,
Oh, yeah.
extraordinary. I think they're amazing. That younger generation out there just knocking the socks off, challenging our perceptions of our identity and leading us to a whole new way of thinking and being. And then yet there are still people who, like the non-resuscitation clause that happened or we heard about through COVID, and you're like,
Right.
seriously? So yeah, I think it's complex, there's a lot, and it depends on the different parts of the world we live in, different cultures. If you had my condition, albinism, in certain parts or countries in Africa, your
Oh, absolutely.
experience is very different. I'm privileged.
Yeah, you mentioned the whole thing of hiding. Two-part question with this. Why did you hide, and what was it that brought you out of that?
Exactly. I think you probably articulated it better than I could. I hid it because I couldn't identify with it at the time, because the stereotypes that existed, because I was fearful that I would not be given the same chance and opportunity to reach my potential, because people would be hung up on the fact that I had a disability. I hid it because I was frightened to ask for help, because I thought people would say I was looking for attention. What's been probably the more challenging part of when I finally came out of the disability closet, people say, and I think they say this as a compliment, or they think it's a compliment, they say, you don't look disabled, you're not disabled enough, you don't look blind. And that's tiring. I find it really hard to, am I defending my identity? What does disabled enough mean? What does visually impaired and blind mean? I don't know. So I think part of me wants to hide away from that, actually. And then what made me come out is something I think Maya Angelou captured so beautifully in a quote, which is, there's no greater agony than an untold story inside yourself. And I came out because it was agonizing, pretending to be perfect, pretending to be somebody I wasn't, because I wanted to belong. And in that yearning to belong, and trying to be somebody else, it was suffocating. And so eventually at 28, it was too hard to keep it in. So I had to get it out, and that's what happened. Yeah, eventually I came out. I was working as a management consultant with Accenture, and that's when I eventually came out of the corporate.
Yeah, that's the journey. That is the journey. That is the discovery. And the fact that you quoted Maya Angelou just made me love you even the more so. Right then. So with all of that,
Was
oh,
she was
absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with all of that, why did you become involved with Billion Strong?
I'm going to give you, there's a few reasons, but I'm going to give you the absolute truths of the heart of the reason for me, and it's
Yeah.
a woman called Deborah. When I began the Valuable 500, I mean, I'm 21 years in disability business inclusion since I stepped out of the disability closet. But Valuable 500 was the biggest stretch I've ever done in my life. It was a huge, audacious challenge to get 500 of the world's most influential CEOs and their companies to position disability at the executive board level, make commitment, and build the world's biggest CEO community after UN Global Compact in 2 years and 3 months. And it's an extraordinary achievement. And to have begun that on the main stage of the World Economic Forum. And it was audacious, and it was bold, and I was terrified, and I was so scared about failing. One of my angels was a lady called Deb. And sometimes when you're doing work like this, it's the loneliest work you'll ever do, right? And I am a troublemaker, and I am a rebel at heart, but you still get scared. And when you're remortgaging your house to make things happen, and when people like Deborah are like, I believe in you, and she uses all her network and all her resources and everything to support us, you never forget that. You never forget who was there with you at the beginning. So when Billion Strong came and she said, will you, won't you? And I look, how can you not? Because I truly believe we're here to help each other, to rise with each other. If I help you, I don't take away from myself. If I shine the light in Billion Strong, I don't diminish the Valuable 500. I actually believe the more that we raise each other, we raise together. And so that is the absolute first reason. It is all my love for a human being who loved me. And it's not that I owe her. It's because I believe in her as much as she believes in me. But the second reason is because exactly that. I believe in collective power. I believe in collaboration. And I believe in visions of a world that will change. I believe in the power of the disability community to be self-determining, in our talent and our potential, in the value of us, in the paid value of us. Let me just underscore that one. And this is my family. I'm part of this family, and this is my voice. And I don't want to stand on the sidelines, but I want to support this organization, lifting other voices and making disability be an identity that is compelling. And I want to change that. And I believe we have a lot of work to do, and we have to support each other. And of course I would be part of another.
So we're honored to have you. And I will tell you, Deborah, who is the chairman or the chairperson, the executive chair of Billion Strong, has been a guiding force and a champion in the community and in business for a long time. And again, so grateful for her. So what is it that you would like to provide for Billion Strong? What is it that you would like to bring to Billion Strong?
Can I bring my...
Baby girl, you can bring whatever it is you want to bring. Bring it.
System shaken. Can I bring I really often think I have this insatiable desire to be free as Caroline Casey. And I want that for every one of the billion voices, actually the 1.3 billion voices. I want to bring that freedom of expression and identity and talent to the table. I want to encourage us to be louder together in a positive way. I want to hopefully pass on some of the learnings of the Valuable 500 and what it's like to be creative movement, and to share some of the ways in which we made things work and to share some mistakes so you don't have to
Right.
make them all over again. I want to bring an energy, and I hope that my energy is positive. I'm here to learn, believe me. I want to bring my sort of that insatiable desire for making things change. That's I think, and to sometimes, as somebody was asking me recently, what do you think you were born to do? And I think that I was born to love, really. But I hope that in the work that I do is that I'm part of helping other people love themselves, because it's taken me a long time. I'm not fully there yet, but it's that piece that I talked about right at the beginning of this conversation about self-acceptance and self-love, and it's the permission to do that. And I think that's contagious. And I hope that we will bring that with a Billion Strong. I hope that I can challenge us to even go further than we might have ever imagined. I want to be a friend and an advisor and a shoulder to cry on, and somebody that's good to dance with, and somebody who wears kind of crazy earrings and sparkly wings. I want to bring a bit of the magic of all of this movement.
Yeah, and you do. You bring all of those things, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And so the flip side of that is, what do you hope to gain from Billion Strong?
A billion friends.
Yeah.
A billion friends. Look, we can overthink this. I think being part of something, working with groups of people, working in collectives, working in collaboration, working in teams, working together to make something better. I think there is nothing more exciting than being part of change. What is wonderful for me to be part of Billion Strong is that I'm part of it. I don't have to lead it. That's you, Lamondre, and no better man do we have to lead this. And there's another reason that I'm involved in. I remember sharing a panel with you. I remember moderating you. You've got incredible energy, and to work with leaders like you, that's fantastic fun. It's great. And also, I think, is it okay for me to say,
Oh, yeah.
Can have fun as well? The joy of bringing change, the joy of challenging. And it is so joyful not to be having to lead it. I want to be with it, which is, great. And I think to meet our other board members and to be part of that, and to be part of, and not to be part of, I belong here. I do, and that's good. And it's exciting. And I think it's just this incredible moment that we're at. You call it the moment of transformation. I think we're at a moment of the decade of disruption. And I'm, whatever I've got in these 50-year-old bones and skin and heart, you got me. I'm here. I'm here to do what
and it definitely is such a win for us to have you on board, to have you as a part of this. And so with that, with all that fire, with all that passion, with that rebel heart and everything, is there a quote or a saying that really speaks to you, that resonates with you, that hits you to the core, that you would like to share?
Yes, I have a few, but I want to say one thing that's really important about Billion Strong for me which is going to connect to this quote. We have talent. We all have talent, and we all have potential. We all have skills. We all have insight and innovation. But I'm a professional, and I'm really proud of that. And I have talent, and I have skill, and I've developed and honed those skills. And I want to be valued for that. And how my identity actually has made me invaluable, if you know what I mean. So that connects to this quote, another Maya Angelou quote. Remember that you did the very best you could with what you had at the time. The journey to self-acceptance comes with a lot of falls, a lot of mistakes. And you've got to forgive yourself as you go through life and you make those mistakes. And I guess the reason why I love that quote as well is because I forgive myself. I have to forgive myself for not owning my identity, for hiding it away. But I just did the very best that I could at the time with what I knew. But now I know differently. And now is a different time. Now I want that Billion Strong voice to be recognized for its professionalism, its talent, for its vibrancy, for its insight, for its innovation, for its potential. And so in a way, I forgive what I didn't do well over 20 years ago, and I hope that I'm doing better now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And yes, you are. Even what happened 20 years ago was a part of the evolution. It was a part of the transformation that brought you right where you are today. And so whether it be celebrated or whether it be looked down upon, whatever position you want to put it in, that's fine. But the truth is, it's a part of what made you who you are. It's a part of what made you magnificent. It's a part of what made you beautiful. It's a part of what makes you human. So Dr. Caroline Casey, we certainly do appreciate, I personally appreciate your involvement with Billion Strong. And even though you said fashion icon, what do you mean? Crazy earrings and all that kind of stuff. It's the confidence you rock it with. That's what makes you a fashion icon in my eyes. And I tell you what, if you want to learn more about Billion Strong, if you want to become a part of the movement, go to our website, billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. And check out the website. Join the movement, volunteer, make a donation. Because you know what? We are stronger together. We are Billion Strong. Thank you.
Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now, here's your host and CEO of Rue Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. I am the CEO of Rue Global Impact, and we work with corporations and governments to make sure they're meaningfully including people with disabilities, and we're proud to be a social enterprise. And also, I'm the chairman of Billion Strong. Please go out and join our free movement at www.billion-strong.org. And speaking of Billion Strong, I have one of our global advisors and our country partners today, and this is going to be a shorter episode, but she's coming back on. And we were having technology problems, which is the story of all of our lives these days. But also, I'm not going to butcher her last name. So I'm going to call her Jewel, and she's joining us from Lagos, Nigeria.
I'm actually in London. I'm in London at the moment.
Oh, you're in London today. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
great.
in Nigeria next week, but yeah, today
okay.
I'm in London.
Well, please tell the audience a little bit more about who you are. I heard you speak at a real big event, and I was blown away by you. I just was very impressed with you. So I wanted my audience to know more about you too.
Thank you. My name is Jewel Okwechime, and that's a Nigerian surname. I was born in London, but I've actually lived in the UK. I've lived in Nigeria. I've lived in Australia. I've lived in America, Scotland, Wales. So yeah, I've been around the world a lot. My background is I'm a chartered chemical engineer and also an environmentalist. So I have worked for all the major oil and gas companies, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, Schlumberger. And with that, I have been working for them as an environmental advisor. So basically helping them to pollute less, engage with the stakeholders, engage with the government, write procedures and processes in place to help them to care more about the emissions going into water, land, and into the sea as well. So I looked at it as a very unique opportunity because most chemical engineers don't understand abatement, don't understand how to save the environment. And environmentalists are too, you must not do this, you must not do that. So I was like the middleman in a way that understood the engineers and also understood the environmentalists. So together I was able to work with them and to be able to comply with the environmental legislations and as well as to be able to produce or any sort of materials that we were making for whichever factory or industry. So with that, I've been networking a lot with private equity guys. I used to go to Cape Town for the oil week. and we used to have lots of fun, lots of parties. And I used to say, why am I doing the wrong thing? Everyone's having so much fun. I feel like I was doing a really boring, I was in a very boring career. So I was like, I would love to have fun like these guys. So I said to them, like, how can we, collaborate and work together? And they were saying, oh, Jill, we're interested in looking at oil and gas assets. And that was how I became an investor. So I started to invest in oil and gas assets in Africa, but mainly with Australian companies. And from there, I grew this huge private equity team. And I started doing lots of deals in terms of helping small companies that were looking for funding to operate their oil field. And so I was doing that for a while until I had a meeting with one of the most powerful men in Africa. His name is Tony Elumelu. And he said to me that he wanted me to work for him. And he said, would you move back to Nigeria? And I was like, yeah, because I was quite nervous because it would be a big step because I've never really worked in Nigeria before. And I said to him that, yeah, I would work in Nigeria. For you, I would like that opportunity. I know that he was connected with all the global leaders. And I said, I would like to network with them as well. And so I took that opportunity to move back to Nigeria and work for him as his senior executive assistant. And with that, I got to build my network. And with that network, it's just been opportunities and I've met lots of wonderful people. I've learned a lot about the industry. I learned a lot about Nigeria as well. And it gave me an opportunity to also learn about how to be a different kind of leader, especially for people that were less fortunate or people that don't really have, that were not educated and they had to work for me. My role was, I was the head of administration and business development. So I was dealing with everyone from the drivers to the cleaners, to the cooks, to the security, all the logistics, everything to do with the air conditioning, the fans, whatever we had on site. It was my responsibility for the running of all those things. So I had to deal with all sorts of different people with different backgrounds, with different educational background. And so that was quite challenging, but it got me to understand a little bit more about how they work and how they need to feel motivated, and I use that a lot to motivate them. And yeah, so it was a real eye-opener for me because I never knew people could earn that little money and were still coming to work every day for that amount of money. And so it did make me feel like I could also help them as well in looking at their entrepreneurial spirit and letting them know that they can do other things as well, not just a 9-to-5 kind of job.
Well,
so I've been
Jewel, so I know that you're very tied to, like you said, environment, making sure that we protect our beautiful planet. But I also, and I'm deliberately throwing this to you, you also don't look like a private equity investor. You don't, so we've had some very interesting conversations about you being a Black woman from Nigeria and well-traveled, and how you actually had to change who you were so that others would be comfortable with having a Black woman in the room. And then, of course, you really care about, as you said, people that are disenfranchised. Because I know when you heard what we're doing at Billion Strong, you're like, how can I help? I'll support Nigeria. Let's get all of Africa involved. And why should we get all of Africa? I certainly have a lot of opinions of why we should. But I was just wondering if you would explore a couple of those topics too.
Can you, because there are a few things you just mentioned, which I wanted to.
And I'm going to remind you, it was interesting to me when you talked about working in the banking system, the financial system in Australia, and how you experienced that.
It was, so basically, I'll start off with my degree. So I studied chemical engineering, and I felt like I wasn't going to be able to prove that I am a chemical engineer. So what I did was I had the Institute of Chemical Engineers, which is an institution that helps you to get accredited. And you get to the next level, association, and then you get to the highest level, which is fellowship. That's all I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was to get to the highest level as an engineer, professional level, and that I was recognized by an institution, because I was concerned that people, when I walk into a room, they go, oh, she's an engineer. How can she be an engineer? I go, but I'm chartered. I'm a fellow engineer. I'm actually the highest level professionalism as an engineer. So that was my way of being comfortable with being an engineer. And then being headhunted by an Australian company was also, to me, like the best thing that could ever happen to me, because it was really fast. I just had a phone call, and then they just offered me the job on the phone, and they told me that, okay, we're bringing a big truck, taking all your stuff, you're moving to Australia. I said, wow, this is a huge change. I didn't know anything about Australia at the time, all I knew is that it was a great job opportunity. The salary was amazing, everything was perfect. So I moved there, and within the first month, I was having challenges, and which you're talking about. I was working for the largest oil and gas company in Australia called Woodside, and about 2,000 staff. And I noticed, obviously, straight off that I was probably the only Black person on the project. And I had an issue with one of my colleagues who were in the same job level, and he was trying to say to me, "You're working for me." And I said to him that, "No, I don't work for you. I can work with you." And he got into this really heated conversation about trying to correct me that I worked for him. And then I said no, and he got upset. And he got upset that I think they said he cried or something, and that it had something to do with how I spoke to him. And so I got called in by the supervisors, and they had this chat to me about how that I basically don't know how to handle conflict in the office, and that I need to see a psychologist. Mm-hmm. And so the HR arranged for me to have sessions with a psychologist. And I remember sitting down with her, and she was saying to me, this thing is, when I was trying to say, this is the issue, I don't understand why he's been upset with me. I was trying to really defend myself about how this is my point. I didn't come all the way from England to work for someone on the same job level as me. And then she says, look at it this way. You're Black, you're a woman, and you're different. And everyone else just look at you and they go, wow, who's this person? They get scared and they're terrified. Look at them as the victim. And then you realize that you can see that they are the ones that are like having to be comfortable with you being around. And I was like, oh, okay. Wow. And I was like, wow, I've never thought of it that way. And so I said, okay, at least now I understand what the issue is because I'm just too much, and I need to. You need to change who you are, because that makes a lot of sense. Not make so that the others can become. Yeah, because I was like, we used to have these overalls, and I would paint my nails. I did everything to look feminine because I just didn't want to get lost in that uniform we wore all day long with our hard hats and our boots. So I really like to show myself off with my rings and my nails and that sort of thing. But yeah. And it was later on, like now, when I think back, I'm like, wow, I mean, like, that doesn't sound right. That's not really acceptable what she did. And I didn't even know because I just wanted to get through the day because every day was wanted to belong. Right. Yeah. You just wanted to belong and do your job. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what the work we're all doing together. That's why I know that we don't have a lot of time, but she's definitely coming back on, and very proud once again. She's a global partner and a country partner with Billion Strong. But why do you think it's so important that we do more meaningfully include Africa in all of the conversations we're having? Yeah, for me, I believe that I am in everyone, that I see myself in everyone. And when it comes to Africa, I see more of myself in Africa, and I see how optimistic the people are. But at the same time, they don't have the same opportunities that I have, or opportunities that are in developed countries, and obviously it's not their fault. It's just the fact that we are in a country that has a lot of, I don't want to say negative because I know that everything happens for a reason. It's just unfortunate that they're faced with lots of challenges, and no one seems to be doing anything about it as in a way that is actually impactful. People do try to do stuff, but I just feel like there's so much more that can be done. I always look at Africa like a white canvas. There's so much opportunity because they're all ready to learn, and they're all like fresh energies that's quite unique and authentic. And to me, it's not about, obviously, we're all special. It's about how able we are, where we have the ability to do everything. I don't even like using the word disability because to me, it seems like sees this something. So I like to look at it as that special people. Everyone's special, everyone's unique, everyone has to be unique to make the world go round, to make the world as beautiful as it is. And everyone's part of the world, everyone's part of us. There's no separation, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. And when I look at Africa, I look at it as a country that is vibrant, that has a different kind of sound, and it's so vibrant. It just so has rich. Yes,
It's
in
rich
so
in
many things.
so many
Yeah,
ways,
yeah.
not in the traditional ways,
Yeah,
we would say, but it's rich in resources. The
yeah,
people are amazing. That's why other countries came and stole them away because they were so,
yes,
wonderful
yes,
specimens. So it was actually used against them. Why
yeah.
do you think Billion Strong is important when it comes to Africa, the people with disabilities in Africa?
So the word, I guess the word the word itself, billion strong. It's
Yes.
about the billions, about like just in Lagos alone, one city in Lagos, it's got 20 million people. If you can just touch like 1%, that's a huge amount of people. And so billion strong is now looking at the numbers. And that's what makes the difference. You're not just going, we're going to do, it's just the name alone just brings that power to let people realize that we are billion strong together, and we're all coming together and we're doing something great. And everyone is going to be recognized, everyone's going to be counted. There's no exclusion. You're not part of it. You can't be part of it. Everyone's is part of it. And that's something unique. It comes with the actual name. The name itself carries so much volume, and that's
I love
what's
the name.
that's what's going to move lots of people.
I know that once again, I want to make sure, sorry for the technical problems we had, but that's
All right, we
But-
moved on. It happens for a reason.
I agree. And the reason why we are just so thrilled that Jewel is one of our advisors is because she has done so much all over the world, and she's such a leader and a champion, and she wants people included, and that she cares about our planet, which I don't know why people don't care about our planet. Our planet's a living Earth too. But Jewel, will you tell people how they can learn more about your work, what your websites are, where you're on social media? Once again, you'll be able to find her on Billion Strong because she's guiding us, thank goodness. But she's had such an interesting life. And when we sit and talk and she starts telling me the stories, are we surprised that and I'm white, that when a beautiful Black woman walks in the room, does she need to adjust her behavior so the white people in the room are comfortable? I'm hoping we're moving past that kind of stuff, because I know another beautiful, talented African-American that was told, why do you think you can be an engineer?
Yeah.
But I think we need more leaders like you, Jewel, and we need to make sure others are in. So you're helping us make sure every part of Africa is included, and that we're really thinking about this in a way that is inclusive of all of the different cultures and things. And I really appreciate that. But tell the audience how they can find out more about your work.
How can you find out more? I guess there's very few Black engineers. That's a bit of a hippie and a biohacker. Like, I've always known that I know I'm different. I know that for a fact, because I know the way that I think, the way that I process things, everything is quite unique. But yeah, it just in terms of like how to find me, it's kind of like I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm also on Facebook, and I'm also doing a lot of interviews in Nigeria around Billion Strong, because I do want to like capture as many people as possible, and to get the support, the donations and things like that. So I have been pushing for that this month, and it's a very exciting time. Yesterday was Literacy Day, which was kind of like nice, because I'm thinking, that September is like a special month with all the different days coming up, and I was like happy that this is the time that we are doing this talk. And one thing that is about me is that growing up was that I was considered to be this clumsy child. I didn't have any friends or anything, or I was the one that didn't know how to talk to boys and that sort of stuff. And I was the one that was uncomfortable when my boobs were growing, and I was like, what the hell is this? Where did this come from? There was no internet. There was no one to tell me that like I was going to grow these parts. And I was like, what's going on? And everything just came as a shock. And I had to get through everything all by myself. And because of that, it's made me stronger. It's made me also realize that gift of all those things, all those times I went through growing up, was to make me who I am today.
Right.
I'm very, very comfortable with my skin, who I am, and everything else. But it wasn't like overnight. It wasn't like I just grew up. Like I was a nerd. I wore glasses. And my mom wouldn't, my glasses would break. I'd say, Mom, can I get a new one? She's like, nope. And then I have to super glue it, use a foil. I might pin it up here. I could use a hairpin, clip it in my glasses. I didn't care. And people would laugh at me, like, I don't care. Like, I just have to get by. And these days, kids are now going through all these mental health issues and things like that. And I look at them and say, is it because they have all the information coming up on the internet telling you that you have a problem? You're not okay. Something's wrong with you.
Correct.
And so that must be me. If you have a headache, you can find out you're dying of cancer tomorrow if you have a headache. Just go on the internet and find out, I have a headache. Would I live till tomorrow? No, you won't. So I guess in a way, I was happy that I didn't get too much exposure to too much information on the internet, because I just basically had to figure things out just by going inwards. And that's one thing then.
Which we all need to do.
Yeah.
We all need to do.
And
So I know that we're out of time in it, but
yeah,
I just wanted to introduce Jewel. I'm so impressed with her. She has so much to offer the world. She's already doing it. And I think we need the quirky, innovative, creative people. I'm that way. I've got gray and purple hair, and I'm very proud to be different. But this is how we move forward. So Jewel, thank you so much for being on the program. I'm sorry it was so short, but I'm so glad you're going to go back out and be on the show. I expect to have her as a regular guest, and she's a very big, important part of Billion Strong. So Jewel, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to coming back real soon.
Yes, and we'll get it. We'll go right to Zoom next time. We won't try the other one. So, all right. Thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.
I'm Lamondre Pugh, CEO of Billion Strong, a global nonprofit organization for and by people with disabilities. the time where we pause to celebrate and to recognize the contributions of the global citizens with disabilities to this world. And I will tell you, some amazing things have been happening. Some of our partners, some of Billion Strong partners, are doing some amazing things around the globe today, and they do it every day. Every day they do that. So it's really amazing. It's really amazing what is happening. And even as we continue to move forward, even as we continue to recognize what's happening, I think it's important that we realize that this work is really about celebrating the strength of the human spirit. That this world, that this time is not just about celebrating people with disabilities, but in celebrating people with disabilities, what's really happened is that we're celebrating humanity, because disability is a part of the human experience. It is neither negative, neither is it positive. But what it is simply a point of diversity. It is simply a part of the human experience. It's a part of what makes me me. And I often say that my disability is not the defining point, but it's certainly a defining point, just like the fact that I'm an African American, just like the fact that I'm an African American raised in the southern portion of the United States. And there are so many stories, there are so many examples of people living life to the fullest. And honestly, this is one of the reasons that Billion Strong exists. Billion Strong is a global identity organization that was established by and for people with disabilities. And our goals are to unite, to elevate, and to empower the global community of people with disabilities to develop a positive self-identity, a positive disability identity, so that we can affect and impact positive change throughout the world. And why was it important for us to really focus on identity? Well, I have a very simple definition of what identity is to me. And in a really simplistic way, for me, identity is a two-way street. It's how you show up in the world, but it's also how you see yourself in the world. How do you see yourself? How do you identify? Who are you to yourself? And we've realized that in many cultures around the world, and this is a global thing, people with disabilities have traditionally been marginalized. People with disabilities have experienced the brunt of biases. People with disabilities have experienced what it means to be discriminated against, to be viewed as broken, to be viewed as a problem. And unfortunately, in many instances, what begins to happen is that we begin to believe that. As a person with a disability, we begin to believe those kinds of things, even when we don't realize it, because ableism is a real thing. Well, Billion Strong really is about helping to change that narrative, both the internal narrative and the external narrative. The stories that the world tells about who we are, and also what we tell ourselves about who and what we are. And I think it's important that this was a grassroots effort, that this didn't start with some organization outside of the community saying we should do something for them. No, this movement started with the community saying we need to do something for us. And that's what makes this movement so powerful, because There are a number of organizations out in the world doing some amazing things, and they do those amazing things every single day. And they're really making a difference, but they're doing it for people with disabilities. This is a movement that is being powered by people with disabilities. And when I say by people with disabilities, I'm talking about, yes, individuals with disabilities themselves, but we're also talking about our allies and accomplices. You see, having a lived experience with disability is very important. Why is it important? Because of perspective, because of an intimacy with the topic. Because many times, in order to really understand the perspectives, in order to really understand the impact of the situations that we find ourselves in, and sometimes we put ourselves in them, it takes a real intimacy. It takes a real firsthand experience. And that's how this movement has been generated. That's how this movement came into fruition. And we're looking at partnering. We're looking at bringing the community together, not just as individuals, but I'm also talking about organizations. I'm also talking about alliances. I'm also talking about how do we move the global community of people with disabilities forward? How do we take control of the narrative of the global people with disabilities? And the only way to do that effectively is that people with disabilities have to lead in that regard. And so what does that mean? And what does that look like? And even why is that important to us? Well, first of all, we recognize that the 1.3 billion number that we see that's out there by the World Health Organization, that's a huge number. That's a serious body of people. However, we also recognize that that number is probably quite conservative because so many people refuse to identify as people with disabilities, and so many people don't want to be associated with people with disabilities. And so the reason that we want to change that narrative is simply because in that perspective, people with disabilities are devalued. People with disabilities are seen as broken. People with disabilities are seen as less than. And we know that's the furthest thing from the truth. When we look at the economic impact in a positive way that people with disabilities have, we don't hear that story told very often. When we think about the number of people with disabilities that actually lead their families and that are quite successful in terms of whatever that individual or that society or that culture views as being successful, there are a large number of people with disabilities that is their story. But the truth is we don't hear those stories very often. And when you don't hear a story that's positive very often, but you hear a lot of stories that are negative, sometimes you begin to believe those things. And this is what I mean by taking control of the narrative. It is not to whitewash situations. It is not to say that everything is perfect, that everything is good, that everything is moving in the direction that we want it to, because we recognize that it's not. But it is to bring balance, and it is to tell the truth so that people can live authentically, so that people can exist just as they are without thinking, I have to hide this part of myself because people will think ill of me, or I have to suppress this portion of who I am because they will see me as broken if I don't. No, this is a movement about being completely human. This is a movement about being comfortable in who I am as I am, and not thinking that I have to try and change something that I cannot, that I have to somehow bend, squeeze, and fit into a space that was designed to exclude me. No, this really is about opening the doors to be 100% who you are. And that takes bravery. That takes real bravery. It takes bravery to live authentically. It takes bravery in order to stand up and say, this is not good for me. And we need to do something about that. It takes bravery to demand a seat at the table that has traditionally blocked you out. It takes bravery to stand up and say, I am a person with a disability and I'm proud of it. It takes bravery to do that because the general concept in many areas is that that's not something to be proud of. In fact, you need to change who you are in order to fit in this world that was never designed for you. It takes bravery to say, even though we have traditionally been marginalized, that we're not going to take it anymore. In fact, this is what we want to do to move forward. This is a brave movement. And this is a movement that is going to require all of us getting together to move forward. And that does not necessarily mean that we'll always agree. And Lord knows, because of different cultures, because of different regions, because of different areas, there is certainly a diversity of opinion. And that's a good thing, because we're not a monolith. We are not all thinking the exact same way. But we have to create an environment where differing opinions are welcomed and appreciated, even if you don't agree. But what it does require is it requires unity. It requires us coming together as a collective and moving forward from different areas, from different regions, from different perspectives, but still unified in the advancement of the community of people with disabilities. And we've got to show up. We've got to show up in places that we're not traditionally seen. We have to show up in areas that we typically are not seen in. And we have to show up strong. We have to show up billion strong. And so with that, I'm inviting you to join the movement. I'm inviting you to become a part of the Billion Strong movement, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything to join. Just go to our website, billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org, and learn about the movement. Join the movement. And you can even consider making a donation, because all of the things that I spoke about earlier, about unifying, about elevating, about empowering the global community of people with disabilities, it requires finances. It requires the empowerment of finances in order to do that on a global scale. And we are global, and we're not just focused from a Western perspective, but from a global perspective. So join the movement. Go to the website, join the movement, but also go to the website and click the donation button. Now we're going to continue running some content today in celebration of International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And as we do that, come back, look and see what's going on, but also invite your friends, invite your family, invite your colleagues, invite people who could benefit from this kind of content, And our hope and our goal is to produce more content, more, introduce you to more thinkers and people who think differently and people who are actively doing things to make a difference. We want to spark something. We want to spark something that says that we can do this and we will do this because we're committed. We're dedicated. And it's not just the community of people with disabilities, but this is about impacting the world by ensuring that people with disabilities have a voice and have a seat at every single table. Because if we're talking about doing things like fulfilling the SDGs from the UN, if we're talking about making certain that no one is left behind, we cannot do that without people with disabilities at the table. We cannot do that without people with disabilities having a voice. So go join the movement and empower the movement by making a donation. And also come back later on in the day and share this information with your friends and families. Just go to billion-strong.org/events. That's billion-strong.org/events. And check us out later on in the day and share that with your friends and family. And this really is about unity. This really is about coming together. And the reason that I know that we can do this, particularly if we come together, is because we are stronger together. We are Billion Strong. Thank you. I'm Nomad, CEO of Billion Strong, a global nonprofit organization for and by people with disabilities. Now, there are a lot of organizations around the world doing amazing things on behalf of the 1.3 billion people who identify as having a visible or invisible disability. But what we haven't seen, at least until now, is an internal movement, a global community of people with disabilities that have come together and that says, this is who we are, these are our issues, and we matter. And that's what we envision for Billion Strong. It's really a declaration of who we are and what we can do. It is also a way of recognizing and honoring all of the intersectionalities that are represented in our beautiful community. Now, this can get complicated sometimes because society in general sees disability as a deficit or weakness, and that can't be further from the truth. I have a disability. I'm not broken, I'm not weak. My mobility may be different, but I can do anything that I want to do. For example, I'm not interested in climbing mountains. Now you may be, and that's fine, but I'm not. But I am interested in moving mountains, and that's exactly what we plan to do. What we have to remember is identity is a two-way street. It's not only about the way that the world sees you, but it's also about how you see yourself. Having an organization like Billion Strong that focuses on identity is critical so that we can share and talk about our lived experiences with disabilities and let people know what's happening around the world. And sometimes you don't even know what's possible for you until you see someone in a similar situation doing it. And that's what this movement is all about. We are moving the needle on perception, other people's perception, and our own. The goal of Billion Strong is to help people find their own empowerment and move forward. And we want to make it sustainable. And we can do this by creating a loop of identity, education, professional development, and economic empowerment. And here's the thing. We can have all the kumbaya moments we want. And I love kumbaya moments. I have them all the time. But until we can start to see real economic empowerment, until we start to see real financial changes for people with disabilities all around the world, then we're just having kumbaya moments. I'm passionate about moving us forward as a community and as a world. And we seek to unite, to educate, and to elevate. And this is an invitation to you to roll up your sleeves, come along with us on this journey, and work with us and move this forward. What we're doing is huge, and we need your help with raising funds for Phase 1 and Phase 2 of Billion Strong, and to set the groundwork for connecting people with disabilities all around the world. When we come together as a global community, then we will truly begin to see things change in our favor. We're stronger together. Billion Strong. Make your contribution today. Welcome, audience. I am Lamondre Pugh. I'm a Black man seated in my home office. I have a bald head and a full beard, and behind me there is a bluish glow, and there's some artwork in each corner. And I'm seated in my power wheelchair in my home office in Columbia, South Carolina, in the United States, and my pronouns are he and him. And I want to welcome you to this webinar. Today is the official launch of the Billion Strong crowdfunding campaign. And in honor of this International Day of Persons with Disabilities, we are hosting 6 different webinars in 6 different regions around the globe. And this webinar is specifically designed for the Western European and other groups region. And each webinar that we're hosting today is specifically designed for that particular region. Now, as I said, this is the launch of Billion Strong's funding campaign. And let me tell you a little bit about Billion Strong. I am the CEO of Billion Strong, and Billion Strong is a global identity organization that's by and for people with disabilities. And we exist to help unite, to elevate, and to empower the global community of people with disabilities. And this is really a movement. This is really about the global community of people with disabilities having a voice. And this is a grassroots movement. And so if you want to learn more about Billion Strong, go to our website, billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. And I'm very excited about this particular webinar today because I believe that it will absolutely help spark some dialogue and challenge people's way of thinking about disabilities. Now, when I say challenge people's way of thinking about disabilities, especially from a global perspective, I believe that identity is a two-way street, that it's not only about how the world sees you, but it's also about how you see yourself. So this is really about delving more deeply into that concept so that we can unite as a global community of people with disabilities and effect positive change. So I'm really excited about today's webinar and my guest. So my guest today is David Baines. He is the director of David Baines Access and Inclusion Services. Now, he was formerly the CEO at MATA, the Qatar Assistive Technology and Accessibility Center. But now he really focuses on David Baines. He is the director of David Baines Access and Inclusion Services. Now, he was formerly the CEO at MATA, the Qatar Assistive Technology and Accessibility Center. But now he really focuses on creating the framework or working within the framework of really trying to advance the cause of people with disabilities. So please welcome David Baines. David?
Hi, Lamondre. Lovely to be with you. Just to briefly describe myself, I was once described as what Father Christmas would look like if he let himself go. So I have grey hair, grey moustache, grey beard, and a slightly florid face. Sat behind me is some furniture from my home, Pine, and I'm here in the UK where I live and work.
Very good. Very good. And we are so pleased to have you. Now, as I gave your intro, you have a really broad experience working with people with disabilities and on behalf of the community of people with disabilities. How did you become involved in this work of disability? How did you become involved in the disability community?
I think I would have to start by saying I don't think I started by being involved in the community. I think like a lot of people my age and so on, it started with one person. So your interest is piqued by the engagement with the person with a disability. And in my case, that was my brother. My brother has cerebral palsy. He's a few years younger than me. So as I grew up, I was always interested in his experience and what life was like for my brother. And that brought me into contact and interaction with far more people with disabilities, his friends from his school he was at the time, other families, because my parents would have had connections with other families of children with disabilities. So I think that whilst absolutely community grew and became something I became involved in, it started at a very personal level. And many people I've spoken to would share that as a starting point. It didn't start from a set of values or determination. It started from experience.
And so often we do hear that. That is the story of so many people, especially when it was related to a family member. Was there any one particular moment that you saw or witnessed that really sparked your advocacy? Because what I see that you do, and so much of the work that you do is advocacy, is actually working to make a difference.
Yeah, I think one of the things when it is a family member is your feelings and what you think needs to be done are very much coloured by that personal experience and the impact upon the whole family, not just upon my brother. So I think the experience was seeing just how challenging and difficult life was for my parents, because the types of services that my brother needed, his experience at school, and as he got older, that we were looking at independent living and so on, all of these things I was conscious created pressure and stress, not only for my brother, but for my family, my wider family as well. I have 3 younger brothers, of which one has cerebral palsy. So all of these were things that daily you saw. It wasn't one incident. It wasn't as if I suddenly saw Paul refused entry to somewhere or an action of discrimination. But it was about seeing that day after day, almost like a drip effect of the stress and tension of trying to be included within a society and within a community, which wasn't really designed to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said it was the aggregate of all of those small things coming together that drove you to that. And so often we think that it was some huge infraction or some huge event that brought us to it. But you're talking about it was simply living the life and all of the things that come along with that.
Yeah, and it was the things such as if we wanted to go on holiday as a family, that was really difficult at that time for somebody whose mobility was really impaired, who was taking tablets and pills for epilepsy. You needed to plan everything out in such detail to make that happen. And families and people without don't have that constant level of thinking ahead about every possible thing that might go wrong. And I think it's that what I remember more than anything else is that.
Welcome, audience. I am Lamondre Pugh. I'm a Black man seated
about having means of making choices, making decisions, having options. And that's what I think independence is really about having options and being able to make informed choices. It's not as simple as saying that you should be able to do anything without support or assistance. If you want support or assistance, it should be available to you.
Yeah, I've always looked at independence, as you said, as not as separate or not as ripped away from, but much more that independence really is about having systems of interconnectedness, interdependencies, where it's woven into the fabric as opposed to being a single thread or a single piece, but you are part of a tapestry that supports one another. I give support and I receive support as well.
And I think this is when we understand the complexity of the networks within which we live, that they are family, they're friends, they're a state, there are charitable organizations, there's philanthropic organizations, support, aid, advice, information may come from multiple sources. The important thing is that we know where we can get those and how we can harness those for our independence. And for me, that's really where technology began to kick in, is for me, is believing that probably the single biggest leverage we had for independence in the future was how technology would be shaped and used and harnessed to the benefit of everyone, and most importantly, people with disabilities.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I for the longest have said that technology has always been the great equalizer for people with disabilities in terms of being able to interact and to affect environment surrounding us. And we've seen that there has been an incredible increase of technologies that used to be specifically set aside for, and that used to be particularly categorized for people with disabilities. But now we're starting to see some of those things in mainstream products and services. For example, I have spinal muscular atrophy, and as a result, I have very little use of my extremities. I require assistance with feeding, bathing, all of those kinds of things. But now I can buy a cell phone just off the shelf, and I'm able to dictate into that phone just using my voice. Nothing special, nothing that I had to purchase separately, but it comes built into the phone. What impact has that accessibility, or what impact has building those features into products have had on the disability community in general?
I think it's really interesting because we're still in such a state of flux and evolution of those products, and probably always will be. I think the impact has been to normalize what we mean by access. For many people, using your voice to dictate 15 years ago would have been seen as a really weird thing to do, because you didn't do that. You typed, you might have a keyboard. But now we see everybody doing that. Around our homes, we've got devices where we can speak out loud for voice commands, to control the environment, to call for information. So what we're seeing is this huge sense by which diversity of access is something that is available to everyone. And we each pick and choose the one which is most suitable for us as an individual. That includes people with disabilities. They can pick and choose the one which works for them. And it's not just always just about what do I need to actually have access. Which way do I like to access? Which way do I find is fast, which is comfortable, which is easy? And I think that's a big step forward when we have options and choices, rather than simply somebody saying, I've designed something for you, take it or leave it. It's up to you. Right. But now we actually have those choices. And I think the mainstreaming and seeing those available for people with such a broad range of needs, who may or may not define themselves as disabled, actually is really important. And as I get older and I start to use those technologies myself, I recognize even more so how valuable many of them are.
Oh, absolutely. Are there any negative ramifications of having this kind of stuff available?
I think we've got some issues that are going to be challenging us in the future. So the first step is that we've got digital divides opening up within the broad community around the world. And those are to do with what is available, what's promoted, what can be afforded. And I think understanding the context within which the technology is going to be used is incredibly important. The infrastructure that's around you. If you don't have an internet connection, for instance, then some of those technologies are going to be really difficult to use. Access to devices may be problematic, depending on what types of phones, tablets, computers are available to you. So we have an issue with digital divide. We have a huge issue around language and the products. Even here within Europe, some languages in some countries are not as well supported as others. Yes, if you're an English speaker, French, Spanish, you're going to find lots of products. But if you're talking a language maybe from Eastern Europe, which maybe has got a fairly small language base, it may be much more difficult not only to get the technology, but the training and support you need in your preferred language. Looking forward into the future, that's going to become more complex. We're going to have huge issues. We're going to see areas like artificial intelligence making more things possible. But if we want to use them, other things we might have to compromise around, such as privacy. So we've got some big social issues tallied with the use and implementation of that technology. And I think one of the things that really strikes me is that balance that we see. Those decisions are not going to be the same in every country. What is right for a community of blind people in France, what they're willing to compromise on, for instance, may be completely different to what the community of people with cerebral palsy in Indonesia are willing to compromise on, because the benefit may be so much greater, but they're prepared to take greater risks. So it's a really interesting few years ahead of us. As a community, we try to decide, how do we determine the balance for us as groups within that, subgroups within that broader billion?
And I think that is the important thing. It's about finding that balance, because of course, especially when we start talking about privacy issues, the first thing that many people want to do is have that knee-jerk reaction that in many instances could thwart the advancement of the technology, could thwart the progress that we've made, and even in some instances set us back. How do we begin to build a framework that strikes that balance? How do we even begin to look at how to create that framework in terms of privacy versus progress?
I think we start from the general population. What are the issues and challenges that we face as people living within any community anywhere in the world? What are the issues around privacy, security, access to information that are constant with our friends and neighbours? We then have to say, okay, what are the benefits that this technology brings? And the benefits for many people with disabilities will have that extra dimension that other people don't experience. So their willingness to compromise in other areas, it's a constant balance to be sought, but that balance may not be the same for everyone. But I think we have to start from really thinking about, okay, what does this mean for us as people with disabilities within our community, the city we live, the country we live, the culture we live in, and what are the additional dimensions that our life experience brings that may suggest actually we've got more to be concerned about lack of privacy than anybody else, or we're willing to compromise more on privacy because the benefit to independence is so much. So how we determine that balance and how we have that discussion, I think, is going to be really important. And to be honest, areas such as, do we live in rural or urban communities could be factors. If we get these technologies, do we get access to employment and education? And if by doing so we have life opportunities open up which are otherwise denied to us, that would be an important additional feature that maybe for other people wouldn't be so important, because they'd get access to education and employment whether they had a phone that listened to them or not. So I do think there's a huge level of complexity, but I think as a disability community, we need to be engaging in those wider debates in society. I'll give you a really good, simple example. We're seeing the rollout of 5G, and we know we have people who are concerned about 5G, normally wrongly, but they are concerned about the rollout of 5G. But the benefits of ultra-fast internet connectivity for those of people with disabilities, always-on connectivity, aren't just about entertainment or interaction for people. They're actually about being able to do things that otherwise are incredibly difficult. So that balance is different.
Absolutely. And that's when you really begin to understand the potential impact of this digital divide that we talked about earlier, because we have to stop thinking, and this is just my perspective, we have to stop thinking about accessibility as just whether or not a piece of digital collateral is somehow accessible, or if the building has a ramp, or if there are curb cuts, or if there are braille signage installed in other places. But we're talking about access to a utility. And in some instances, people believe that it's access to a right, the right to access the internet. And so having that, addressing that digital divide is, I believe, critical to how we progress as a society, not just as people with disabilities, but as a society as a whole. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, I talked about having these kinds of features built into products. What impact does that have on people with disabilities, whether it be positive or negative? But what about access to these kinds of assistive technologies and things that were originally designed for people with disabilities? What kind of impact has that had on the community of people without disabilities?
Oh, I think when we see things that were originally designed to support different types of need in different settings being used by people all the time. Text to speech, the ability to have text read out on your phone, your tablet or your computer would be a really good example. Now, we always thought of that as being for people who were blind or low vision. And then you realize that when you're driving your car and an email flashes up, you can have it read out loud to you. You can set your phone to read that to you automatically. A text message comes in, read to you. So times when actually you can't read what's on screen, or perhaps when you can't use your hands to manipulate the phone, you want to use your voice. You were talking about voice recognition earlier. And that's a great example. There are many situations where you can't type on a screen. So those technologies that were designed to recognize and support the implications of a disability actually have much wider implications and use and value for a wider community. And we used to talk a little bit about what we called situational disability. And it's almost like a variation of the social model.
Yeah,
but it's
let's talk a little bit more about that. Situational disabilities, explain that.
So we always have this idea that the disability is created by the setting we're in. Yeah, it's created by the way in which the world is designed. It's the social model. But situational disability says that might only last for 5 minutes for a person. It might be that I cannot use my hands to do X because I have to be using my hands to do Y. And that varies from somebody driving, it could be somebody carrying a child, it could be all sorts of things. But in that moment, their function cannot be delivered in the traditional way. So situational is that any of us, for any brief time, because of the context and the situation we're in, the ways in which we would normally do things are denied to us. And the technology, through the redundancy of access, input and output, says there is another way to do this. Now, if you're going into then the wider disabled community, and you're talking about people with disabilities, well, actually, that situational disability is my life. That's what it's like every day. Exactly. So what we're saying in that situation is saying, actually, but that doesn't matter. You can use it for 5 minutes, or you can use it for the next 20 years. The technology is consistent. It's the same. But when we use it, how we use it, why we use it, will differ from person to person.
Yeah. And for me, one of the things that I hear in that is that's something that brings us closer together, that binds us closer together, because in that scenario, it ceases to be, oh, this is something that is siloed and set aside for that group over there, and I don't have access to that. But when we make it readily available for everyone to determine how they want to use it and when they want to use it, it somehow makes us more human. It somehow makes us connect on a different level, because all of a sudden it's not special. All of a sudden it's not this magical thing for those people over there, but it's just a tool that we all have access to and that we all can use to make our situations better for us. You know?
And I remember many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was working on a project. We were writing materials for people to start up their own businesses. And one of the big strands in the project was to encourage people with disabilities to start up their own businesses. Many projects like that all over the world. But one of the things that we did at that point was to say, okay, as well as the written materials in PDF and Word, we'll create an MP3 of each one. so that people who are blind can listen to that course material rather than try and read it on screen. Sounded fine. And we did it, and we put it all up on a website. You could choose which one. Did you want the Word, the PDF, or the MP3? And this weird thing happened, that most of the students started downloading the MP3. Because what they would then do when they were on the bus, or they were driving home, or they were in bed, they would stick it on something and play it. Because at that point, they couldn't read it. It was much more efficient in terms of what we found was this thing we'd created, which was supposed to support this handful of blind students on the course, was being used by about 60 to 70% of the students because it fitted better with their lifestyle. And I've always remembered it because that's fascinating. That wasn't what we thought we were doing. And I've said a few times more recently, and I think when we talk about how do we reach to this billion community, we talk a lot about awareness being the biggest barrier. But I think sometimes imagination and creativity about how we apply the things that we've already got are equally significant barriers. It's not just about knowing they exist, but knowing who might use it and how they might use it, I think is really important in bringing that huge group of people and having them included.
Yeah. I agree. I do believe that one of the biggest barriers that we as a world face is the lack of imagination, that we're constantly trying to make stuff fit into a specific mold. Whereas if we just opened up and communicated with each other and allowed people to experience and see what other people are doing, it will indeed, I believe, spark some inspiration. It will spark some concept of brilliance that could absolutely revolutionize someone's situation. And that's one of the reasons that Billion Strong exists. It is to connect the global community of people with disabilities, to exchange ideas, to exchange experiences, because it may be someone in West Africa that's inspired by someone in Japan. Because I often say that sometimes you don't know what's possible for you until you see someone who may be in a similar situation doing something different. And that could spark something in you. So I agree 100% with that.
And I think that is a two-way relationship between different parts of the community. In the West, in Europe and the US, we're pretty well resourced. We're wealthy countries. We're pretty resourced. We've got all sorts of other problems with using that money effectively, of course. But sometimes when you look at how people apply to the same issue when they haven't got that level of resource, you think that's really interesting. We could use that. We could steal that idea. It's a good one. And so it is a two-way process, just because what's the phrase, necessity being the mother of invention. And when you look at what people do because other options aren't available to them, if you look at them coldly and initially, you think, actually, we could integrate that into our provision, into the way in which we approach things. And I think that's something which I find a huge privilege, is to be able to observe what other people are doing. And I was very lucky. I did some work for UNESCO fairly recently, where people would, on stories of people who were defined as successful, people with disabilities who were defined as successful. And it was really interesting. The work was to really try and understand the things that they felt allowed them to succeed. So rather than thinking about the barriers, it was the things that they felt were important. And assistive technologies were definitely one of them.
Right.
Family was incredibly important. Far more important than we might have expected. But ultimately, they had highlighted attitudes. And I thought they were going to come to me and talk about the attitudes of the community, the attitudes of the people around me. But what they actually said was, it's my attitude. I have to believe that I can make this happen. If I believe that I can make it happen, then I can go in and argue the case with anyone. But if I'm waiting all the time for somebody else to do something, I don't believe it would happen for me. And I just thought for me, that was quite enlightening. that it's not just about other people, it's also about ourselves. And those two things have to happen in concert. They have to happen together. But that passion, that belief, that faith in yourself to overcome and make things different for others for the future was really important to them.
Yeah. And that is huge. It reminds me, and I know that this is a completely weird reference, but it reminds me of something that I saw just a day or two ago. And it was simply a meme that was on one of the platforms. And it was the rapper Snoop Dogg receiving an award. And he went through all of his acknowledgments. He went through all of his thank yous. And he said, and last but not least, I want to thank myself. I want to thank myself for believing in me. I wanted to thank myself for pushing myself. I wanted to thank me for not giving up on me. And I think that is the attitude. That is the posture that we have to take. We have to believe that we are worth it. We have to believe that we can contribute and bring value in situations. It's almost like if you were in Las Vegas, which is like the gambling capital here in the U.S., they say always bet on black. Why do you always bet on black? I always bet on black because black is me, you know? And so that's the way to win. That's the way to convince even other people that you can win. So I appreciate that. That was beautiful.
And I think that's that mixture of self-awareness and self-confidence and self-esteem. If we want things to change, if we want new innovations to be developed and so on, then I think making it clear that we can succeed, we will succeed, we believe we will succeed, not because you've done it, but what you do will make it easier because I believe we can do this. And I think that confidence is really important. How we help people develop that confidence in the experience of many barriers and challenges and frustrations that people face, particularly when other factors such as poverty are so clear, I think is more difficult. But helping people believe and have that self-esteem, I think, is really important. I think that, yes, it's a good example. And it's small things. It's not just about being a superstar rapper. It's the little things you achieve as a result of what you have done that should be valued as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's a part of it. Is that what even that superstar rapper or that CEO or that whatever mogul that's out there, that person still is simply a person. That person was not necessarily endowed by some divine entity that made everything easy for them. In fact, when we talk about overcoming those barriers and obstacles, 95% of the barriers and obstacles that we have to overcome are internal. They're inside. In order for us to step outside and make something happen, a lot of times we have to first believe that we can. We also have to assume that there may be some difficulty, but am I committed to overcoming it? Now, of course, when we start to do that, means we do indeed impact and affect the outside elements as well. We do indeed have to stand up sometimes and fight. And sometimes we have to find allies and also accomplices to help us make that change. But nonetheless, the center of it is attitude and how we approach things. And I'm not just talking about internally, but also externally. And we have to show up in places other than those that are only dealing with the issues of disability. We have to show up in areas and places that also impact other elements of our lives. As I said, Billion Strong is an identity organization, and it is about changing how the world views people with disabilities, but also how many people with disabilities view themselves. And so it is the coming together and working through that at once. And I know you have had such a broad experience in working with different areas of the world. How do you believe that the Western world views disabilities, especially in comparison and contrast with how other parts of the world view disabilities?
I think one of the things that strikes me about the Western world is that sometimes we get overly anxious about very fine detail, and language can be a good example. So one of the things that I found when I was working in different parts of the world, I would get people telling me this is the right terminology to use. It has to be this terminology. Everything else is wrong. And then I tried to translate it into another language. And I would get people saying to me, so what's the point you're making? Because both of those words translate to the same word in our language. That subtlety, that nuance doesn't exist. Even at one level, people saying to me that the word handicap and disability both get translated to the same word in our language, because the nuance of disability versus handicap hasn't grown as part of culturally where we are at the moment. So I think sometimes we find it difficult to step back and see the progress that has been made. And also to think about, okay, not just that actually achieving the goals that we want will take many streams of activity. And they're not all going to be the same all the time. Sometimes they're going to go off in different directions. Sometimes they're going to try things that fail. And I think for us, we need to be conscious that many things will get things 80 to 90%, and we will learn from those. But perhaps understanding that sometimes that's going to take time, and that we need to accept that the first time we try to do something, it may not succeed the way we want to. And so I think that's been one of the things that has struck me, is that some of the debates we have in the West are important debates for our community, but they may not have quite the same value amongst other communities in other parts of the world. I'll just give you a really great example of use of language. In the UAE, the terminology used to do legally by government for people with disabilities is people have determined. And some disabled people, when they went to the UAE, to Dubai, Abu Dhabi and so on, saw signs. And they thought this was ridiculous. They thought this was almost offensive. But the truth was, that's the terminology and language that has evolved within that group. And we should have some respect for that. We should value that. We might question why. We might say, why? Why have they gone down that route? What's interesting about that? But what's important is that we respect it.
Right.
We respect the different terminology that's being used. And we respect how cultures and communities have the right to shape those types of issues for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think, David, that is a crux of many of the issues that we see, particularly within the community of people with disabilities, is that even if I don't necessarily follow that way of thinking, or even if it is not necessarily the way that I do things in my part of the world, it's important for me to respect and honor how you see things. It's important for me to understand that it doesn't have to be the way that I think. And just because I think differently doesn't mean that your perspective should be diminished or that it's discounted.
And we accelerate change when we have when dialogue is happening between people with different views and perceptions of what is going to be most effective. And for me, coming back to the technology really should be enabling us to have that dialogue.
Right.
To both speak and listen and think about, what does this mean? What are the really crucial issues for a billion strong community? And how can they be coloured, shaded, represented in so many different ways locally? Well, I think it was The Body Shop, Anita Roderick used to use this term, which was think globally, act locally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always struck me, there's a huge thinking that, yes, we're thinking about a billion people, but that also means acting right down at the grassroots with small groups and individuals. The two things have to come together in some way.
Absolutely. So, David, as we look to the future, what are some of the hopes that you have for the global community of people with disabilities?
What are some of the hopes? The first is, as I say, is entirely selfish, that everything that I need as I get older and acquire more and more disabilities is going to be available to. So I'm now 60 and my eyesight's not so good, my hearing's not quite so good. And I'm thinking, I want to make sure that all these technologies are widely available wherever I go and whatever I do. I think there's some really interesting things that we're going to be thinking about over the next few years. I think using things like artificial intelligence are going to be offer new opportunities for people with disabilities, and especially those who perhaps would be described as having learning disabilities or intellectual cognitive impairments. AI is going to present ways in which information and communication could be made easier for those communities in the future, and those are going to be really important. But the really big and interesting one is going to be augmented humanity. Over the next decade, we're going to see more and more technologies emerging that augment our bodies to address the limitations that our bodies have, either whether it be from birth, through trauma, or as a result of aging. That's a really interesting problem for us.
Yeah.
Because what does that mean for our perception of disability if that medical approach, that health approach of looking at our individual bodies becomes part of the solution again? And because that's not just going to be for people with disabilities. Augmented humanity will be something that is much, much more widely used than that. It'd be part of general population. And I think that's going to be the next huge challenge. And certainly we're already seeing that a little bit in the West. We've seen the arguments around things like cochlear implants. We've seen the arguments around other types of invasive surgery and implantation. That will also open up massive digital divides, massive divides within that disability community, where in some parts of the world for some time, those will be available as treatments. We can choose to use them or not take them. But for some parts of the world, those won't be options. Cost, cultural norms, and so on. So I think that what I really hope to see is that we continue that debate to find that balance between all the different ways. And most important, I think, is to recognize if somebody says, I buy into that, I would like that for me, that we don't criticize them for making those decisions. That actually we let them and give them the respect that they've made a decision based on what they think is right. We might not agree, but I hope that we'll see as a community that actually having that respect for each other and letting people make decisions which may not be the ones we would make, but they're important to them. That, I think, is one of the things I really hope, that diversity of opinion, of thought and decision continues to be valued. Because what we then find out from people who have made that decision is, did it work? Did it work for me? And we can learn from that.
Yeah. Several things in that stood out to me. Options, balance, and respect of others. Those were the three things that really stood out.
People make mistakes. We've all made them.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that we're going to make mistakes. That's the nature of our existence. We are going to make mistakes. But when we make a mistake, that I think it's important that we learn from it, that we learn from the mistakes that we made, and that we're allowed to correct. We're allowed to course correct and move forward. I think we have to do away with banishing people because they have made a mistake. Now, I'm not talking about someone being malicious, and I'm not talking about someone intentionally messing up, because if they're intentionally doing that, then that's not a mistake. But for those who do, that we give them a soft place to land, and then we give them the support to help them